Imagine you are standing on the docks of Philadelphia Harbor. It is October 28th, 1943. The world is at war. The Atlantic Ocean is a graveyard. German U-boats hunting in wolf packs, stalking Allied supply ships through fog and freezing water like sharks circling in the dark. Every night, somewhere in the ocean, a ship is sinking. Men are dying. And the United States military is desperate for an edge, any edge, that will turn the tide. Now imagine that on this particular October evening, a Navy destroyer escort sits in the shipyard, engines idling, generators humming, its hull wrapped in thick cables coiled like sleeping snakes. The crew stands at their posts, officers check their instruments. Somewhere above deck, the order is given. The generators roar to life. A strange, greenish-blue glow begins to crawl along the hull. Not quite light, not quite fire, but something in between. It wraps the ship like a second skin. Witnesses on nearby vessels shield their eyes. The air tastes electric, metallic, alive. And then the ship is gone, not sinking, not exploded, not drifting away. Gone. As if the harbor simply swallowed it whole. And when it reappears, moments later, or perhaps minutes, witnesses disagree. It does so 200 miles away in the naval shipyard at Norfolk, Virginia, where it is spotted by an entirely different set of witnesses, before it vanishes again, and then reappears, back in Philadelphia, exactly where it started, as though space itself had been folded like a piece of paper. The 2 points touched, and then unfolded again. That is the legend of the Philadelphia experiment, and for the next 30-something minutes, we are going to take it apart, piece by piece, layer by layer, to find out where the truth ends and the mythology begins. Because this story is far stranger, far more human, and in some ways far more disturbing than either the believers or the debunkers want you to think. Stay with me, because nothing about this story is simple. To understand why the Philadelphia experiment captured the human imagination the way it did, you first need to understand the world it was born into. It is 1943. America has been at war for less than 2 years, but it feels like forever. The Battle of the Atlantic is raging, arguably the longest continuous military campaign of the entire Second World War, a grueling years-long duel between Allied convoys and the German Kriegsmarine's fleet of submarine wolves. Between 1939 and 1945, German U-boats will sink over 3,500 Allied merchant ships, killing more than 70,000 sailors. The ocean between America and Europe is a killing field. The United States military is throwing everything it has at the problem. Not just guns and planes, but science. The Manhattan Project, the secret program to build an atomic bomb, is already underway. Radar is being refined and deployed on a massive scale. The Office of Scientific Research and Development is funneling billions into classified technologies, bringing together the greatest minds of a generation and pointing them at the most pressing problems of war. In this context, the idea of a secret Navy experiment, something wild, something unprecedented, something based on the bleeding edge of physics, is not just plausible. It is almost expected. Of course, the military is doing something strange. The question is just how strange. And that is the fertile soil in which the Philadelphia experiment grew. Think of it this way. Imagine you are a farmer, and you have heard that somewhere in the next valley, someone has invented a machine that can predict the rain. You have no proof. You have never seen it. But you know the military is out there, pouring money into science, keeping secrets, doing things that ordinary people are not allowed to see. So when a man comes to your door and says he saw the machine with his own eyes, are you going to turn him away? That is exactly the psychological landscape of post-war America. The soil was ready. All it needed was a seed. And the seed arrived in a very strange package. His name was Carl Meredith Allen, born May 31st, 1925, in Springdale, Pennsylvania, a small, unremarkable town in the hills outside Pittsburgh. He was the eldest of 5 children. By all accounts, he was a brilliant, restless, deeply eccentric young man. His family described him as someone with a fantastic mind, but also as a drifter, someone who never held a job for long, who bounced from town to town, who had a habit of pulling elaborate pranks and weaving baroque, detailed stories. He was, in the language of his era, a character. In more clinical terms, people who knew him later in life described a history of mental illness. A journalist named Robert Gurman, who investigated Allen in 1980, and who happened to be a family friend, wrote that Allen was a creative and imaginative loner who had a habit of sending bizarre writings and claims to anyone who would receive them. In 1942, Allen joined the United States Marine Corps. He was discharged less than a year later, in May of 1943. The circumstances of his discharge unclear. What we do know is that he subsequently served as a merchant mariner aboard the USS Andrew Furuseth, a cargo ship that moved between American ports during the war years. This is important because Allen would later claim that it was from the deck of the SS Andrew Furuseth that he witnessed the Philadelphia experiment firsthand. Now here is where the story gets genuinely fascinating, because the man who set the whole thing in motion did not burst onto the scene immediately. He waited, he nursed his secret, he read, he thought, and when he finally made his move, he did it in the most unusual way possible. He sent a book in the mail, and he annotated every page. Morris K. Jessup was not a crackpot. That is important to understand. Jessup was a trained astrophysicist, a former mathematics professor at the University of Michigan, a serious and respected amateur astronomer who had participated in archaeological expeditions in Central America. He was also, by the mid-1950s, a writer, specifically a writer about UFOs. His 1955 book, The Case for the UFO, Unidentified Flying Objects, was an unusual and ambitious work that tried to apply real scientific reasoning, gravity, electromagnetism, the nature of space, to the question of unexplained aerial phenomena. The book did reasonably well. It attracted readers from all walks of life, and it attracted with particular intensity one Carl Meredith Allen. In late 1955, a mysterious package arrived at the United States Office of Naval Research. It was postmarked with a Texas town, and on the outside, someone had written the words, "Happy Easter." Inside was a copy of Jessup's book, and every page was covered in handwritten annotations, written in 3 different colors of ink: blue, blue-violet, and blue-green. The notes appeared to be a conversation between 3 individuals, 2 of whom referred to themselves only by initials. They discussed flying saucers, alien races, and, most intriguingly, a secret Navy experiment in which a ship had been made invisible and teleported across space. The Office of Naval Research was sufficiently intrigued that they tracked down Jessup and showed him the annotated book. Jessup, examining it carefully, recognized the handwriting. It matched letters he had already been receiving. Shortly thereafter, in January 1956, Carl Allen, writing this time under the name Carlos Miguel Allende, had begun sending Jessup a series of extraordinary letters. They were strange documents, unpredictably capitalized, filled with underlinings and odd punctuation, switching between formal scientific language and rambling, almost delirious prose. Allen warned Jessup that his research into unified field theory was dangerous, and to prove his point, he offered a story. He said that in October 1943, while aboard the SS Andrew Furuseth in the Philadelphia harbor, he had personally witnessed a United States Navy destroyer escort disappear in a flash of greenish light. He said the ship had teleported to Norfolk, Virginia, where it was witnessed by the crew of another vessel, before vanishing again and returning to Philadelphia. He said the crew had suffered horrific effects: nausea, madness, burns, and in the most nightmarish accounts, some sailors had been found physically fused into the metal structure of the ship. Others, Allen said, had simply ceased to exist, walking through walls, floating in and out of reality like ghosts. He gave the event a name. He called it the Philadelphia Experiment, and he called the underlying technology Project Rainbow. Jessup wrote back, requesting evidence. Allen could provide none that could be verified. He referenced a Philadelphia newspaper article he claimed covered the incident, but no such article has ever been found. When pressed for specific dates, he was vague. When pressed for names of other witnesses, he deflected. Jessup, initially fascinated, eventually concluded Allen was a fantasist. He wrote him off, but by then the seed was planted. Here is where something genuinely odd happens. Something that conspiracy theorists have never entirely let go of. And honestly, something that is at least worth examining. The Office of Naval Research, after receiving the annotated book from Allen, did something unusual. They did not simply file it away. They commissioned the Varro Manufacturing Corporation of Garland, Texas, a company that did contract work for the Navy, to produce a mimeographed reproduction of the entire annotated book, complete with Allen's marginal notes printed in red alongside Jessup's original text. Miss Michael Ann Dunn of Varro painstakingly retyped every word of the book onto stencils, then ran them off in black ink before adding the red annotations. They printed 127 copies. This became known as the Varro edition. Now ask yourself, why would a branch of the United States military spend time and money reproducing a UFO book covered in the ramblings of a possibly mentally unwell merchant mariner? The ONR's stated reason was curiosity. The annotations contained what they described as intimate knowledge of UFO propulsion systems and appeared to represent a genuine technical debate among multiple parties. They wanted copies to circulate among researchers, but to those who were already inclined to believe something strange had happened in Philadelphia, the Varro edition looked like something else entirely. It looked like acknowledgement. It looked like the government taking the story seriously. And once the government seems to take something seriously, the story stops being a fringe theory and starts becoming a question. The Varro edition circulated quietly for years. It was reprinted again in the 1960s. It became a kind of sacred text in the UFO research community. Dog-eared, photocopied, passed hand to hand in the pre-internet world like samizdat literature. And in 1979, the story finally exploded into mainstream consciousness. Charles Berlitz was famous. Not famous the way a celebrity is famous, but famous the way a man with a best-selling book about a mysterious place is famous. His 1974 book, The Bermuda Triangle, had sold millions of copies worldwide, tapping into a deep vein of public fascination with unexplained disappearances and government cover-ups. Berlitz had a gift for making strange things seem plausible. Not by providing rigorous evidence, but by assembling fragments of testimony official statements, and unanswered questions into a narrative that felt like it was building towards something. In 1979, Berlitz and his co-author, ufologist William L. Moore, published The Philadelphia Experiment, Project Invisibility. The book claimed to be a factual account. It drew heavily on Allen's letters to Jessup, expanded on the alleged details of the experiment, and introduced the idea, attributed to unnamed scientists and officials who had allegedly been involved, that the technology was based on Albert Einstein's Unified Field Theory. The book was a sensation. Within a few years, it had been translated into multiple languages. It inspired documentaries. It inspired a 1984 Hollywood film, simply called The Philadelphia Experiment, directed by Stuart Raffel, in which two sailors aboard the USS Eldridge are hurled forward in time to the 1980s. The film was not exactly faithful to the source material, but it was compelling, and it introduced the story to a generation of viewers who had never heard of Carl Allen or Morris Jessup. Here in the arc of this story is a moment worth pausing on. A story that began with a single eccentric man sending strange letters. Letters that he himself would later alternately confess and deny were a hoax, had, through a chain of strange events and popular fascination, become a cultural phenomenon. Books had been written. A movie had been made. Millions of people had read or watched it and come away with at least a lingering question mark. How does that happen? How does a story with no physical evidence, no corroborated witnesses, and a timeline contradicted by official Navy records become one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century? That is not just a question about the Philadelphia experiment. That is a question about us, about how human minds handle secrecy and science and the fear of the unknown. But we will come back to that. First, let us look at the claims themselves in detail. According to the most detailed accounts, drawn primarily from Allen's letters, the Berlitz-Moore book, and later additions by various claimants, this is what supposedly happened. In the summer of 1943, the United States Navy fitted the USS Eldridge, a newly built cannon-class destroyer escort, with specialized equipment at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The equipment consisted of large electrical generators and a network of cables wrapped around the ship's hull, capable of generating an enormously powerful electromagnetic field. The theory behind this equipment, according to the legend, was rooted in Albert Einstein's Unified Field Theory. The idea that electromagnetism and gravity are not separate forces but two aspects of a single underlying reality. If you could generate a field of sufficient power and the right configuration, the theory supposedly suggested, you could bend light around an object, making it invisible to the naked eye. At the same time, and this is where the story crosses from science into science fiction, you might also be able to bend space itself, creating what amounts to a shortcut through physical reality. The first test, some accounts say, was conducted in the summer of 1943. The generators were switched on. The ship, according to witnesses on nearby vessels, became surrounded by a greenish-blue glow, a luminous fog that crept across the hull and gathered in the air around the ship. Then, partially, the ship became difficult to see, not truly invisible, but somehow less present, as though the eye kept sliding off it, unable to fix on it properly. The crew, however, suffered immediately. Nausea, disorientation. Some men felt as though their bodies were dissolving at the edges, as though the boundary between themselves and the world was becoming uncertain. The experiment was halted. The generators were shut down. The crew was treated for their symptoms. A second test, adjusted to the configuration of the equipment, was allegedly conducted on October 28, 1943. This time, the result was more dramatic. The ship did not merely become hazy, it vanished entirely. The space it had occupied in the harbor was simply empty. The water it displaced sloshing back in to fill the void. Witnesses saying it looked like something had been suddenly lifted out of the water. For several minutes, some accounts say 17 minutes, others say a shorter time, the Eldridge was gone from Philadelphia. During this interval, the ship allegedly appeared in the harbor at Norfolk, Virginia, where it was spotted by the crew of the SS Andrew Furuseth. Carl Allen would later claim this was the moment he saw it, the impossible shape of a Navy destroyer materializing out of clear air, sitting in the water for a brief time, then vanishing again. Then it was back in Philadelphia, right where it started. And that is when the horror began. According to the legend, the crew were in a catastrophic state. Some were simply mad, screaming, incoherent, unable to explain what they had experienced. Others were burned, their skin showing injuries that looked like radiation exposure. And in the most disturbing claims, some crew members were found physically embedded in the ship's structure, arms fused into steel bulkheads, legs merged with the deck, a hand disappearing into a wall. Some of these men were allegedly still alive, screaming, in a state that no one knew how to address. The Navy, according to the story, covered all of this up. The ship was decommissioned from the experiment. The crew was dispersed. Records were altered or destroyed. The whole thing was buried so deep that it would not surface for over a decade. And only then through the fragmented, unreliable account of one eccentric merchant mariner with a history of mental instability and a habit of dramatic reinvention. Now, let us ask the hard questions. The United States Navy has been unambiguous on this point for decades. There was no Philadelphia experiment. The USS Eldridge was not used in any invisibility or teleportation trials. And the Office of Naval Research, which was only established in 1946, 3 years after the alleged experiment, has stated in official correspondence that it has never conducted investigations on radar invisibility, either in 1943 or at any other time. More practically, the USS Eldridge's complete wartime service record is preserved on microfilm and available to researchers. It is not vague. It is not redacted in suspicious ways. It is a routine, detailed naval log that places the ship nowhere near Philadelphia during the time period in question. The Eldridge was commissioned on August 27, 1943. It spent its early weeks in port in New York. In October 1943, the month of the alleged experiment, the ship was on its first shakedown cruise in the Bahamas, and it would later escort convoys across the Atlantic, making 9 voyages to North Africa, before being decommissioned from the U.S. Navy in 1946 and eventually transferred to Greece, where it was renamed H.S. Leon and served for decades before being scrapped in the 1990s. In April 1999, a reunion of Navy veterans who had served aboard the Eldridge told the Philadelphia Inquirer directly and unambiguously their ship had never made port in Philadelphia during the war. Not once. As for Carl Allen's claim to have witnessed the experiment from the deck of the SS Andrew Furuseth, that ship's own records place it in the Mediterranean during the relevant period, far from the Philadelphia harbor. And then there is Allen himself. In 1969, Allen approached the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, APRO, and handed them a copy of the Varro edition with a written confession attached. He stated that everything, the annotations, the letters, the entire story of the Philadelphia experiment was a hoax. He had made it up. He wanted, he said, to get back at the writers who had profited from his story without compensating him. Then he retracted the confession, Then he confessed again. Then he denied everything once more. This pattern, confession, retraction, reconfession, repeated itself multiple times over the decades, which, in a sense, tells us something important about Carl Allen. He was not simply a liar. He was a person for whom the boundary between story and reality had become genuinely blurry, whether from mental illness, from the seductive weight of the attention the story brought him, or from some strange mixture of both. He could no longer be certain himself what was true and what was not. He died on March 5th, 1994, in a nursing home in Greeley, Colorado. He was 68. He was, by all accounts, impoverished and alone, and the story he may or may not have invented outlived him by decades and shows no signs of dying. So, where does this leave us? The Philadelphia experiment, as literally described. A Navy destroyer teleporting 200 miles through space, its crew fused into steel walls. The whole thing underpinned by a completed unified field theory. Did not happen. The evidence against it is comprehensive. Ship records, eyewitness accounts from actual crew members, the impossibility of the science as described, and the thoroughly documented history of one eccentric, mentally unstable man who admitted multiple times that he made the whole thing up. But something happened in Philadelphia in 1943. Real ships were fitted with real classified electromagnetic equipment. Real experiments with electrical fields and their visual and physiological effects were conducted. Real sailors saw things they did not fully understand and told stories about them afterward. And into that space, between what really happened and what could be imagined, a remarkable human story grew. The Philadelphia experiment is a mirror. Hold it up and you see reflected in distorted form the real anxieties of a century. Anxiety about institutional secrecy, about the weaponization of science, about the gap between official truth and lived experience, and about the fragility of the boundary between the known and the unknown. Those anxieties are legitimate. They were legitimate in 1943. They are legitimate now. Albert Einstein, the man whose name has been attached to this story, sometimes falsely, once said that imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. The Philadelphia experiment is, among other things, a monument to human imagination, to the ability of a single mind, even a troubled, unreliable, sometimes dishonest mind, to create a story so structurally compelling that it burrows into the culture and refuses to leave. Carl Allen died alone and impoverished in 1994. Morris Jessup died in a parked car in 1959. The men who served aboard the USS Eldridge are gone too, one by one, carrying with them the memory of a war they actually fought, a real and terrible war. Nothing like the supernatural adventure the story imagined for them. What remains is the legend. And the question it keeps asking, decade after decade, every time someone reads about it for the first time and feels that cold tingle at the base of the spine. What if? What if there are things the government did, things the scientists knew, things that happened in the classified darkness of wartime that we have still not been told? What if the boundary between the possible and the impossible is drawn in a different place than the official maps show? We do not know. We cannot know. That uncertainty is the permanent gift of the Philadelphia experiment, not a window into hidden truth, but a reminder of how much of the world remains genuinely mysterious, genuinely unresolved, genuinely worth asking questions about. Because the day we stop asking is the day the lights go out.